Good day, grade 12 learners, and welcome to today's English home language lesson. My name is Bosh Suchit, and this lesson is proudly brought to you by the Gauteng Department of Education in collaboration with the Cyberno Discovery Center. Now, grade 12s, you are obviously well into the exam mode now, and my prayer and my hope for you is that you have started to stabilize yourself. In other words, you've got a good idea of how many hours to spend on each subject, you've got a plan in place, and you are motoring towards getting the very good marks that you want to at the end of this examination. Now, we are at that point where I cannot help but stress to you how important it is that come tomorrow morning when you sit for your English home language paper one, that this is where you've got to be very careful on how you answer your questions and what you're going to do with this paper. All right? Because here now, grade 12s, it will dictate the outcome of what your results will be looking like at the end of 2025. Okay? One paper down, you cannot change what happened in that paper, but here you have the second opportunity to make sure that you excel. So I hope that by now you have gone through your revision cycle of where you've done at least the last 3 to 5 years papers for the NSE exams, where you've looked at the kind of questions that appear, you've looked at maybe the memo or the marking guideline, and seen whether your answers are linked to that marking guideline or not. All right, and then you sort of now are fine tuning where you need to um, be working in terms of how to get the maximum marks now. All right, so this afternoon we're going to be looking at a strategy for you for paper one. It is that quick win one where we're saying to you, okay, we know the pressure's on. Let's now see if we can find ways to get the marks that we need. If we do not get it um, the way we should be getting it, then there are a few things that we can do to adjust our way of answering questions to make sure we then get the benefit of answering what the question asks of us. All right. So the first thing, grade 12, is when you get that paper, remember you have 10 minutes reading time. Make use of it. Don't spend that time thinking about tomorrow and what you didn't do and all of those things. Focus your attention on that present moment where you now take the paper, read the comprehension passage, or read over the paper in terms of the instructions of what is required of you, and then work with I am understanding which part of the paper you're going to start with first. Okay, so read your passages and reread it if you have a little extra time there as well. And when you're doing that, please remember to highlight certain points that you are finding interesting or important when you're reading the text. You have to also, at the back of your head, remember that 45 minutes has to be spent on answering the questions in the comprehension. All right. And then that classic question that appears, which is the last one, the comparison question between the two texts, where you take text A, a part of text A, and text B, and you compare those two parts, you're getting that mark allocation, which has now changed to 3 marks. It was 4 marks before, but we don't know if it's going to continue like that this year as well. All right. So 3 to 4 marks is that comparison question that you should be spending at least 6 minutes on to get all of the parts answered. All right. And then read through the question, passage again quickly, please. So you're looking at about 3 times reading the text over. And then remember to focus on the title and see where the link comes in with the other paragraphs thereafter to the title. And then when you're reading through your comprehension questions, now this is where it's very important that you're finding certain keywords and you are highlighting them or you circling them, because that is where you now know that that is important information that I need to address in my answers. All right. And then as you're reading through the entire question, you're focusing on the main ideas there that you are going to look for in the passage itself. All right. So grade 12s, you have to firstly understand what is the reason. In other words, the purpose of this text. Why was it written? Okay. So from there, once you've established that, it's going to be easy then for you to now break down that the rest of the content to link it to the title. All right. Now, when you are reading the paper through, instructions are there for a reason. Remember, it's guiding you on what the examiner wants you to look at. So read it very carefully and understand what it's saying to you. The keywords, as I mentioned to you in the comprehension passage, remember, highlight it or underline it or even circle it if you cannot do the highlighting thing. That's fine, just so that you are sort of pulling out the most important information. All right? And then read the questions and decide which level of questioning is happening here. Is the question, sorry, now dealing with something on more of the effect that this passage has on me as a reader? Then that would obviously then hint towards a higher order question and a higher level of thinking about the text, okay? Critically engaging with the text. If you're having something like where it's just saying, look at this paragraph and explain this to me, then you know it's sitting between that level 2 and level 1 kind of question, okay? So if it is a level 1 or a level 2 question, grade 12s, you need to know that it requires very straightforward answers of you, not too much of thinking, and yes, sometimes even simply paraphrasing or rephrasing parts of that comprehension passage is going to give you the answer there. All right? And then when you're rephrasing your sentences, all right, this would be a skill that you should have learned by now if you were making use of newspaper articles over your lifetime. All right? And if you haven't, that's also fine. Hopefully, that while you have been studying as well the subject of English, that you've been able to rephrase content in your own words, okay? And then that would allow us to see that you understand what you are reading. Now, please, when I'm talking about these parts, I'm working in the sections that are from the beginning of the paper all the way to the end. Now, when you're answering it, you are going to try and find out which is the which question is the one that you're more comfortable with before you start with the others. Now, for many of us, it seems to be that the question 2, the summary, is the quickest and the easiest one to work through first, because right now you can quickly get your 7 out of 10 marks there, and then you go then to question 1 because you're still quite fresh with the paper, okay? And then we attempt 3, 4, and 5. That's just something to think about, okay? Tackle question 2, get it out of the way quickly, and then move to question 1. Right. Also with question 1, grade 12s, please remember your mark allocation is a guideline to you to say, for example, if it is 2 marks, it means that my examiner is looking for 2 main ideas to be discussed. So I got to put some meat into it, okay? If it's a 1 marker question, it's basically just a 1 word or maybe just a part of a sentence that needs to be tested on, and then that would just be straightforward. The moment we're going anything then from 2, 3 to 4 marks, then you know it's requiring a lot more meat onto that answer. All right, read the text thoroughly, please. Get an outline of each paragraph um, of the comprehension, and then you can gauge what it is saying. All right, and then what is also quite nice is for that learner who is very much a visual learner, all right, you can start to imagine what the text is all about and then formulate your answers from there. Now, remember, grade 12s, that although we are testing about your general knowledge here or topics that would, sorry, topics that would be very much about the general happenings in society in paper 1, it doesn't necessarily mean that your idea is 110% correct. You've got to contextualize your thoughts as well to what is being tested on in this paper. All right, so some practical advice for you with regards to the comprehension passage. That question words, which is, I hope by now you've gone through the list with your teachers or you have a revision pack with you where these things are very explicitly uh, shown to you. For example, what does the word explain mean? What is the examiner asking of me here? What does the word discuss mean? Okay, and there's specific things there. For example, do I have to have just a straight one sentence answer, or do I need to add a little bit more? That would be with looking at the word discuss. Okay, then looking at other words like your question words like critically, comment, or critically discuss, for example. All right, those um, question words will then also need possibly a comment added to what you are talking about. All right, so remember to please go through those question words and understand what each of them are requiring of you. All right, so circle those key question words also when you are going through your initial reading. Please also try to remember. Now, you would recall we had that listening comprehension very early in the year, right? It was then trying to show you if you listen to what is being said, you gauge more understanding. But if you just hear, it's very much on a superficial level. So here we're saying to you, please try when you read to retain the information that you have got while you from that text while you were reading it. All right, and then obviously by highlighting the main ideas, it will be a reference point for you to go back to. Okay, try and recall also when you've read the passage, where did you find this idea? Towards the front part or the top part of the text, to the middle part of the text, or even the latter part. These are things you need to work with, okay, practically. Please always put your eyes into search mode. In other words, you're searching for meaning. You're going to look at the top part, look at the bottom part, and in the middle, find the link between the top and the bottom, okay, of the text. And then read the whole sentence, please. When you find that main idea, read the whole sentence to get complete meaning of that sentence or even a word that you might be struggling with in that paper. All right, or part. So, some recommendations. You need to also now go through and check again on the before you go and write the paper tomorrow. Check the previous papers and then look at the simple, easy questions to start working with, and then look at how the answers to the more difficult ones were phrased. Okay, so types of questions which have appeared in the previous editions are like, for example, the explanation of the usage of question, of a question in terms of a text. Okay, so there may have been a rhetorical question being used in the text. Why is that used in the text? You need to understand that. All right, then there might also be a single sentence paragraph. So you have paragraph 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then all of a sudden there's a one-liner which makes up paragraph 6, and then 7, 8, 9 carries on. Now you need to know what is the impact that is coming out of that single sentence paragraph there. Okay, there is a reason why the writer has put that single sentence paragraph there. Okay, usually that contains also his complete attitude or idea about the text, or his thought on the text, content of the text. Right. So the impact of the diction, in other words, the choice of words being used. Why do we use a paradox in this paragraph? There will be a reason for that. Why have we made use of irony in this particular text? You need to know that. All right. So you've got to go back and revise what is irony, what is paradox, what is, for example, hyperbole, what is the nouns and all of those things. Okay, you've got to work with those things throughout. So the reason for using certain words has to be understood. Now, you know, when you wrote your paper 3, for example, you used certain words because that you felt would express your ideas very clearly. So in the same way, the writer of the text has used particular words to get his or hers ideas across. All right. Then that standard comparative question, which I said to you, the last one, is usually the comparative question, you have to now already have that recipe understood of how to answer that comparative question. All right. Then the next thing is to please go and learn generic explanations of stylistic devices and then link this to the question in context. So, for example, the writer's use of a single line paragraph is because he is now asserting his viewpoint on that topic. Okay, that would possibly then be something to look at. Also then also come to the idea of why is this author saying that or the writer saying this, okay? And then in your head now, think about it. When the writer said all of these things, did he come to a valid conclusion or not? And this would obviously be seen as you have read and understood the text. Okay? Then also look at the reasons why the writer starts a paragraph with a question, for example. Okay? The visual component of the comprehension question, please remember, it does not focus on the skills of visual literacy that you work with in question 3. All right? Like body language and things like that. But it is asked based on the content that is being delivered in that text B. Right. So visual and verbal cues, remember, are conveying a message in a cartoon as well. All right. Now, the verbal cues are usually defined as anything spoken. In other words, the words coming out of that person's mouth, okay, or that character's mouth, as opposed to the written text, which is then, sorry, as opposed to written or relating to words in general. Okay, so it's about what is spoken by the characters. So in the classroom, the word verbal will then be used to refer to any kind of written dialogue present in a cartoon, as opposed to visual, which refers to the visual composition. In other words, how is that entire cartoon coming together? All right, linked to the content of the cartoon. So please, I hope by now you've understood the difference between the visual and verbal cues, right? Then the conclusion, remember, it's very important that it's linked to the title or the introduction, okay? So there is usually where we'll find significant points that are given to us, which is in relation to the major points that were discussed in the passage. So look at that conclusion and then look at it being as a final appeal to us as the reader to understand what this writer wanted to say. All right. Now, the other issue with quotations that you must also be aware of is that this is evidence for an answer. So it's not an answer on its own. So when you are quoting certain parts of the text, remember as well, it is to justify the viewpoint that you are holding. All right. The comparison question, as I mentioned to you, the primary point of each resource has to be discussed. But remember with this question, it might just say paragraph 9 or paragraph 8 of text A in relation to text B. So be careful with that. All right. So when you have the comprehension, how do you unlock this passage for meaning? The first thing you do is to skim through the passage quickly. In other words, you gauge what is happening in the text, get a general feel of what's happening. All right. Then you read the passage whilst you linking the content, very important, to the title. So you find the link between the content and the title. While you're doing the reading, grade 12s, encourage yourself to answer leading questions to yourself, obviously, okay? Like, why is this idea being expressed? What is he trying to get across to me here? where will this be relevant in the big scheme of things? Okay, how will this impact anyone else who reads this particular text? That is what you need to be asking yourself, all right? And then again, please read the text and now focus on the text when you are looking at the questions now. So try and see. If it says to you refer to line 10 in paragraph 1, then it means you've got to go to line 10 in paragraph 1 and try and figure out what is being said there. And that's where your answer should more or less come from. Okay? Sometimes it may be starting there and asking you to now analyze that particular line in reference to what the real world out there as well, or what's happening in the text. Okay, so read again and try and gauge meaning. And then answer your questions very clearly, please. And remember the numbering of your answers are very important. So if it says 1.1 in the question paper, then your answer should be 1.1 and you write your words out. Don't put in 1.1.1 and then expect the marker to now think, okay, where's this answer relevant to? Okay, so mirror the question number with the answer given. Right, and then obviously before you submitting, you are checking your answers. Right, that's your comprehension, your quick wins there for you to get the marks. Okay, remember to target at least about, I would say, 12 to 13 marks, if not 15 as a benchmark out of 30 there. All right. Then we come to question 2 or section B, sorry, which is the summary here. Please remember grade 12s. You have also seen that over the last few years of your life, you've learned a lot. And then you started to pull out important information and retained that knowledge base to bring you to the grade 12 year. In the same way, we are saying to you, this skill of summarizing is basically where we're taking large amounts of information and we're bringing it into a shortened version of what was said in the initial passage. All right? So here we're trying to gauge the gist, the key ideas, the main points that are important to remember about that topic. All right? And that's what summary skills are all about. So when you're doing the summary, please remember to follow a recipe as well. Okay? So you read the question and you gather what is the statement and what is the question being asked of me. And then focus your attention on answering the question. While you've done that, now you read the original text and you get a feel of what is all about this text. All right? Read the text again. Now we highlight or we underline the key points. In other words, the key point is the information that you want to use for your point 1, point 2, point 3, point 4. All right. So you are looking for those points. Please always be accurate, clear, and straightforward. If you're going to ramble on an idea, you're going to use up the number of words that can be allocated for another point. All right? So remember that we're looking for 90 words in this summary that has to come to us as markers where we have got all the main points within that 90 word allocation. All right, so don't go and think, okay, I still have the luxury of writing 110 words or whatever it is, or I can write less and all of those things, because then you're going to confuse yourself. Target to make sure that you anything between 85 and 90 words, for example, where you have got your 7 most important points. Okay, so be accurate and clear about what you want to say. Use your own words as far as possible, but if you are struggling to gauge the meaning, then don't even get your mind boggled about all of this. Just find the 7 points and write it down in the bullet form before you then formulate the paragraph, okay? Then please also use interlinking words. So words such as therefore, furthermore, however, all of those kind of words now needs to be used to link one point to the next and the next. All right. Please always use full sentences. It doesn't help us to try and figure out what you are saying. You need to be clear on what you are saying. All right. Remember, I don't know whose script I'm marking. So you are using your exam number and you are just that exam number. And whoever picks up that paper to mark needs to then mark it as they would mark anybody else's script. So you cannot now think, okay, maybe, this person might understand what I'm saying. No, you need to be clear about what you are saying so that that person who's marking it can get what you're trying to say. All right? Please leave out all the examples. It's unnecessary information. It's not going to add anything extra to what needs to be said. All right? And leave out direct speech, for example, as well. So, what should you do with the summary? You are pulling out the main idea of each of the paragraphs, for example, each of the paragraph. So you outline that in the side on the side of your question paper, for example, all right, or your booklet. Focus on the key details, all right. So we are stripping away the irrelevant stuff. You use your keywords and your phrases. You make sure that you're breaking down the larger ideas, for example, into simpler statements. Please highlight the topic sentence and highlight the concluding sentence in the text so that you know where what the writer was trying to say when he used these particular sentences, right? And write only enough for you to gauge the meaning and to get us to understand that you have now given us the gist of what this text is all about. All right? Be succinct and use complete sentences, please. So we focus on the topic to get what the text is all about. We read all the instructions given to us because that will say to us what the examiner is looking for in the summary. All right, which key ideas. We're then going to identify all the aspects that are needed for us to summarize the text. We're then going to make sure that we write the topic in large, bold font at the top of our planning part of the paper. All right. And then we know this is the main thoughts, all right? Main thought. We're going to then read the identified topic again before we read each sentence to ensure that we remain focused on what we are looking for. All right? And then, more importantly, please identify the main point in each paragraph. Make sure that it is relevant to the question being asked. Write it in your own words if you can. If you cannot, it's also fine, but just remember to get that main idea. All right. Please remove the extra information and example I said to you. Be accurate, clear in your descriptions, and then more importantly, focus on the core of the text. Okay? And then please also, grade 12s, find the keywords or the key phrases that will still capture what this text is all about. Right. Now, the most important thing is you captured the gist, you've got the interesting detail there taken for us, and you have now thought about writing this particular text. Please don't write using the words like I and we. It's not what we want of you. Please keep it in the third person approach. Right. So, how do we mark this particular summary? Remember, everything that we do with English has a marking guideline or a rubric. Now, with regards to the summary, we are saying that if you are giving us the paragraph, we're looking for 7 points within that paragraph, which will warrant 7 marks. And then if it's logically flowing, it's making sense, we allocate the language marks accordingly. Now, something you need to understand, grade 12s, is, for example, you got your 7 points. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get 3 marks for language because it all makes sense. No, we are saying that when a candidate, in other words, when you have not quoted verbatim. Now, what verbatim means is it's capital letter for capital letter, full stop for full stop, um, everything exactly the same from the text. That is verbatim. Okay? The moment you have changed one or two things, then it's no longer verbatim. All right. So if you have not quoted verbatim, we would then say, okay, this candidate maybe has 1 to 3 points correct. So in other words, 1 to 3 ideas are correct in that answer. Then we award 1 mark. If you have given us 4 to 5 points which are correct according to the marking guideline, you would then receive your 2 marks. And then if you got your 6 to 7 points completely right, and you have not quoted verbatim, then you get your 3 marks for language. 7 plus 3 gives you 10. So can you get it around in your head that even though I may not get all my ideas correct, but I can still get the language mark only if I have my points correct. All right, so you got to make sure that you understand what the statement is and what the question is when you are doing the summary. All right, now if you are that candidate who didn't really understand the text and you then just quoted your 7 points in relation to what the question's asking of you. So you have quoted exactly as it is. So the capital letter is the same. The full stop is the same at the same place. The comma is used like that. Everything exactly the same. If you still have 6 to 7 quotes given there, you would get a 0 mark for language. So you will still get 6 out of 10 or 7 out of 10. Okay? If you've got 4 to 5 quotes, then we're going to give you a maximum of 1 language mark. And if you've got 2 to 3 quotes, and then we're going to then allocate at least 2 language marks there. All right. So be aware of that. Okay? When you're quoting verbatim and when you're not quoting verbatim, how we mark. So remember, we are basically removing, stripping away all the descriptions, all the examples, all the explanations. We are just bringing this text down to the simple, straightforward 7 or 8 ideas. We are replacing jargon with our own words only if it's relevant, okay? You want to make sure that the 7 to 8 points you have now indicated is keeping the main idea of the text. And then you are listing the key concepts that you have found in the text, and then you write down your 7 points. Now, if you note that you have 7 direct quotes, what would happen? You would still score 7 out of 10. So this is where I'm saying to you, rather you focus on your summary first, get it out of the way, get your 7 or your 8 or your 9 or your 10 marks in the summary, and then you work with the comprehension. Right? It's very hard to fail the summary grade 12s if you follow a particular strategy. But if you're going to now get muddled with what you are trying to say to us, then the chances is that you're going to make mistakes. So be aware of these tricks or these hints that you can use, to get the marks. Remember, it's not necessary in the exam to rephrase the entire passage in your own words. All right? So to avoid the misinterpretation of the content, or to avoid you getting confused. Rather, just find your 6 7 points that are in your head correct and in relation to the topic, question, sorry, and then you write it down or put it into the paragraph. Make your slight alterations. So you can obtain more marks if you substitute just a single word with a synonym. Remember, the synonym and the homonyms obviously different. You're removing a word from the original sentence and you adding another word there without changing the meaning of the sentence. All right? The same thing in relation to the punctuation mark. If you are removing the punctuation mark and putting in another one, please make sure it's relevant to how it's being used, or how the other punctuation mark was used in the sentence. All right? You can change the tense of the sentence, and you can obviously change the word order of the text. Right, sentence. Then we come to the advertisements. Please remember now that we're getting into the nitty-gritty part of the language concepts you have learned over your lifetime. All right? And if you have learned anything this year, I hope you have understood, for example, with the advertisements, the ADA principle. In other words, what in the text is attracting my attention, what is keeping me interested to read this text first further, what is then asking me, or what is conjuring up from that text within me a desire to buy into this idea or buy this product. And then what has the advertiser said to cause me to now go and take action? All right, so that principle is quite important to understand when we're dealing with advertisements. Now, this first 10 marks, it is the visual text, and it may or it may not have some written text with it. So it doesn't matter as long as you understand how to analyze the text. So the visuals are often a better way of communicating what the advert's all about. Okay? So and they sort of make the language barrier not so difficult. However, advertising is not always, remember, grade 12s, about selling a product or selling something, okay? It could be giving you an idea to think differently. That is something that you need to also be aware of. So it can also aim at creating an awareness about a particular issue, generating support for a particular adventure that's coming across now in the next few years, for example, or even appealing to you to be part of a humanitarian cause for society. So this is why we have adverts. And again, remember, there's a purpose for the advert, and then we have to establish whether the advertiser has achieved his purpose or not. Now, here's the ADA principle described to you there very much with words, but I did explain it to you previously. So ask yourself, what attracts me to this particular advertisement? What is keeping me engaged or interested to now go and buy this product? For example, he may have used different pictures. He may have made promises. He might have included short facts that make us think, okay, this is something to think about. So you are now continuing to be interested. All right. And then while he's doing all of this, he's persuading you. So he's conjuring up this desire to say, this is why you need to believe this. This is why you need to buy this, because it's going to do A, B, C for you. All right. So the promise, for example, to be more popular or to be part of the in crowd, if you buy into this product or this idea, would be something to really look out for. And then from there, the impact is obviously then to go and take action. And then what is the expected action that this particular advertiser was wanting from us would then be where you're going to be looking at. So this encourages you to take action, to go and buy the product or employ that particular service. Right. So here you'll need to know where to obviously purchase the product, and you look, for example, where it'll say like a special offer, or this costs you only 199 Rand. that already seems to be cheaper because it's no longer 200 rand. You see, that kind of thinking needs to be um, taken. All right. Sorry, that just was a gremlin there. Let's go back. So, with the advertisements, please remember to go over certain important concepts. Firstly, establish what is a product, what is a service. Okay? So, one is tangible, in other words, you can touch it, the other one you can't. Difference between product and service. Understand what the target market is. Now, if you that economics learner or a business learner, that's different, okay? You would have understanding. But if you're not that learner, it's also fine because as long as you understand that this particular advert is targeting, in other words, it's aimed at a particular group, then you would be able to identify the target audience or target market. So it's a group that is targeted for this particular product or service. Then you got to know the difference between things like the brand. All right. Um, Now there's various brands out there, and you would know it also then in the minds of people makes them feel different when they buy into a particular brand of this tackies as opposed to that tackies. Although they do the same thing, because it's made you to believe that this one makes you not suffer with sore toes or a sore heel, then you think, okay, that's the better tacky than the other. These are the things that advertisers do. They manipulate us to believe that this is the best thing ever. So you got to look at the brands that are also being advertised. Then, important, please, your slogan versus your logo. Very important themes, topics there. Sorry, not topics. Very important terms to look at as well. All right, that catchphrase as opposed to the symbol being used in the advert. So, again, asking yourself leading questions. You need to ask yourself when you look at the advert, what technique is being used here to persuade me to believe that this product is the best? Okay. So, he may have used different font, he may have used different backgrounds, he may have used a celebrity. Whatever it is, you need to understand what techniques being used. Okay. How has the advertiser used the main image? So there could be one image and there could be sub images in the text as well. All right, to get his message across to me. I need to also then look at specific language that is being used. There would be very much emotive words being used or persuasive words being used to get me to buy into the idea. And then maybe he's included a testimony of someone that is important. You know, if you had Chris Hemsworth saying something, for example, as opposed to George Clooney, the thing is, who appeals to you more, George Clooney or Chris Hemsworth, or even Iron Man? All right, who appeals to you more? If those testimonies are there, it's going to attract your attention. It's going to make you want to believe that what this advertiser is saying is the gospel truth. All right. So you need to think about these things like that. Then also ask yourself certain questions like, have I looked at the mix of the images? All right. Because certain images will be at a particular point in that particular text as opposed to another point. Look at the mix of colors. Now, you won't have the luxury of a printed paper with color, but you'd have the light gray, the dark gray, the black, for example, those shades being included. And you need to know, why do you have a light shade as opposed to a dark shade being used, okay? The setting obviously is the area in which the incidents or the picture is, is drawn. Okay, there's a setting of where this is particularly taking place. The camera angle, don't worry about that too much. Look at the placements of the objects, for example, within that text. If you're looking at the character that might have been included, look at his or her body language in that particular advert, and then look importantly at the size of the images, because one might be more pronounced than the other, and then obviously the font as well. One might be more bold than the other. sentence, okay, that is being written. So that's important there. And then also think about, how does this advert affect me personally as a person, for me to relate to it or not. All right. Then the next part for you to look at is the language that is being used. I did mention to you that there are types of languages. So the first one is obviously the informative language, where this advertiser is informing you about particular services being rendered. He's going to make use of jargon, the technical terms for that particular field of study, and he's going to make use of language that's going to allow him to sell his product. Right? The informal language is very much where the vocab is sort of words that we would use every single day in society. It's less sophisticated. There's very simple, straightforward sentences being used, a lot of slang or colloquialism as well. Right? The emotive language, a lot of imagery being used, for example, it appeals to your senses, appeals to your emotions as a person. It's going to persuade you to believe in what's being said. All right. And then the figurative language also linked here, where they are going to be using language devices that will captivate your interest and make you want to continue reading, in thereby making it more entertaining. All right. And then the use of a pun, for example. Remember, that's that clever play of words where you would then look for conveying another meaning of what is being shown. Right. So I did mention to you to look at the slogan. That is your catchphrase. All right. Look at the facial expression. For example, is the person having wide open eyes? Is the person having a smile? Where the lips go in a particular way? Or is it downturned lips? That kind of thing. All right. Your other facial expression might be, when someone's like squinching their eyes, why would they do that? That kind of thing, all right? And then also remember, facial expression is the face. Then the body language is looking at the gestures, all right? Is the person leaning into the other? Are they making use of their hands quite a lot? Is it a folded posture, open posture? All of that in terms of body language, all right? Then we're looking at the product. For example, here, that is the particular tangible thing being sold. All right. And then the information is then contained in the body copy. All right. About this particular product that is being sold. So you're looking at there, for example, the use of the font. You're looking at the font size that is there. You're looking at do they have bolded text as opposed to italicized text, that kind of thing. All right, so important. And then obviously the logo is the symbol for that particular brand. So please, when dealing with adverts, you need to establish the message of the advert. You're going to look for the emotive words or the pictures that are being used. You're going to establish, secondly, the target audience. Who is this particular product being aimed at? Right? We're looking at our verbal cues versus our visual cues. In other words, the text that is there as opposed to what we are seeing. Oops, and now I got the gremlin. Let's see, there we go. All right. And then looking at the slogan versus the logo, and then punctuation marks that have been used here. Remember, please, grade 12s, you'll see maybe ellipsis or an exclamation mark or a question mark with an exclamation mark next to it. There's reasons as to why these punctuation marks have been used like that. And hopefully you have already revised and understood why they are there. All right. And then the use of the rhetorical question. Obviously, there's no need to answer it right now, but it's there to make you think further about what it's, what conclusion you can draw from this. Right. So with the advert, you're looking at the describing part. What type of visual is there? What are the details I can see in this particular text? Then I'm looking at taking the literal understanding of the text and applying a figurative understanding of it. All right? connotative meaning to possible words that are being used. I'm looking for the intended audience here. I'm looking when I'm evaluating how effective was this advertiser in getting his message across. All right. What impact did his advert have on me as the reader? And then will that impact also be conveyed to others who read this particular text? All right. And that would obviously look at whether you agree with um, this particular advert or not. Okay, so just to recap adverts, please, firstly, you need to understand what the words in the advert means. So if you're finding a difficult word there, grade 12s, don't get baffled. Try and look for other information in the text that would kind of link to what that difficult word might be meaning. All right? So understand what is shown in the advert. Look at the drawings, look at the paintings, for example, the pictures, and that will help us to then gauge the message of the advertiser. We're looking at the slogan and the logo, remember? We're looking for the visual and the verbal techniques that have been used here to keep us interested. We're looking at the various punctuation marks that have been used and why they've been used. We're looking at, okay, if there's a given text to us, we're highlighting one or two key ideas there because that would give us a different understanding of what the advertiser wants to say to us. And then we're looking at the marks allocated for each of the questions, 2 marks allocated for a language mark here as well. Remember, the last 2 questions would more or less be the language questions that we have to apply our understanding of language taught in class with regards to those adverts. All right. So again, remember the advert grade 12 will again be relevant to your scope of experience. We cannot test you on concepts that you would not face as a grade 12 learner. We can't test you things that are going to happen when someone is 65 years old, for example. It's all relevant to where you are. So think about current events. Think about social events happening at the moment. Think about maybe political events that are happening. Although, controversy is something we're not so open to, dealing with. But if there's a concept that needs to be dealt with and is happening right now in the realm of your grade 12 experience that's relevant for you in the next 2 to 3 years, then most likely it could be tested as well. All right. So go and familiarize yourself with what's happening in the media right now. Then we've got the cartoon. Now, the cartoon also is a 10-marker question. Remember, that's a piece of art that's given to you. And please, grade 12s, understand that a cartoon is given to create humor. So there's events happening, there's ideas that are being compressed into the frames, and it's there to draw your attention to those ideas. And you then need to obviously read the cartoon and then try and figure out what the message or what the humor is in this particular cartoon. So it's usually dealing with a current or a social political event. We are challenging the stereotypes, in other words, your preconceived ideas about certain issues in society, be it a specific group of people, be it a nation, be it a notion you have of a particular group of people. That kind of thing is where we're going to be challenging your stereotypes, all right, your biases. Now, the cartoons can either be a single frame or a series of frames, okay? But you know that for us to have just a single frame, for example, then everything is compressed into that single frame and it's just 2 people immediately talking to each other and that's it. That's your single frame, all right? Now, if you're looking at the series of frames, it's showing the time, the passage of time through each of the frames. Now, that is there here, given to you, that series of frames. Now, if you're looking at terminology of cartoons, okay, this diagram is a bit small, but I'm going to try and make it there. All right, we're looking at your frame, as I've discussed. You're looking at a speech bubble, which I'll show to you just now. It is where we're talking about the words of a person. We're looking at symbols, that kind of thing. So I'm not going to try and get you to understand this right now, but I will take you through the terminology on the next couple of slides. Right, so here we go. In terms of your frame, this is a frame, all right, from the series of frames. Okay, the movement line is this here. It is basically showing us the actions that the particular character is going through. And the movement lines, which is also the motion lines, are usually quite a hurried, showing us a speed at which something is happening. All right. Then we've got the speech bubble, which is here, for example. All right, where a person is actually speaking those words. And then the setting would then, in this case, in this frame, look, it's the kitchen, for example, or it's the area where a room where all of the things are happening. The kitchen stuff is there, the clothing is there, whatever it is. It is a setting of where this incident is happening. All right. Then we've got your facial expressions. Look at the face there. All right. Wide open eyes, for example, signaling something, or no smile signaling something. And then you've got the body language, which is dealing with how the arms have been showcased to us. Maybe the arms are open, maybe they're on the hips, for example, maybe like this, sort of sitting to the side. That kind of thing is the body language. It shows the certain behavioral patterns of the character. Okay, so with the cartoon strip, please remember to analyze what the characters are doing within the frames. Look at the setting. Where are the events taking place? All right, there will be hints of that in that particular frame. Look at the words that have been used, because those words linked to the image will create the humor. Right, again, look at your mark allocation, the 2 to 3 marks. Remember, 2 marks is 2 ideas explained nicely. 3 marks would then link to, for example, a technique being identified, and then relating that technique to the text you are now looking at, and then a comment as to whether it's appropriately used or not would warrant the 3rd mark. Revise words that you would use to show us the tone of the characters. You're going to look at the facial expressions of the characters within the frames and come up with what's the general mood, what's the general feelings that the characters are experiencing within those frames. Okay, looking at the body language, I've taken you through that already. Look at the font size that is used in the particular frames, and the punctuation mark. For example, the ellipsis usually features quite a lot with the cartoon. Find out why it is there. All right, so here is another example of the cartoon. It's structured there for you, and let's look at what we're talking about. There will be a text box that normally sets out the scene that is to follow. The frame is normally that shape of the square I showed to you, which is building the sense of time. The gutter is the space. So this space here, okay, is the gutter. That is between the 2 frames. So that is where you need to sort of fill in the gap of what you think might happen between frame 1 and frame 2. So you're allowed to make assumptions. All right. Then we've got the next part, which is the characters that you need to focus on, the people, the fictional people, sorry, who are having a conversation with each other at the time. And then crucial with regards to the cartoon is the punchline. All right, that final line of the joke where everything comes together to make sense as to what humor is being showcased to us here. All right, so look for that punchline. So here is the 3 types of speech bubbles you need to focus on. The first, sorry, not speech bubbles, the bubbles. The first one's the speech bubble, where it's the direct words of the character. So we could actually test you, for example, with the language question, where we say, rewrite the following sentence or rewrite the sentence in frame 1 in the indirect speech. So obviously it means that the direct speech is what the person is saying within those frames. All right. Then the thought bubble is the cloud-like shape with the 3 dots that usually is there, signaling words which have not been spoken but are happening within the thinking realm of the person in their minds. And then the jagged edge speech bubble, that is containing the emotional reaction of the character. Right? Please go over irony. Know that it is a strange or a funny or a sad situation in which things happen the opposite to what you would expect. Look at sarcasm, saying or writing the opposite of what you mean, or speaking in a way to make someone feel stupid or create anger. The pun, obviously, to create some humorous sense here, we would use a word which has possibly 2 meanings, all right? That would come through there. And then satire, the use of the humor to criticize someone or something and make them seem silly. So that's important. Go over those technical terms, all right? Body language, I did say to you, it's going to talk about the person's mood, the character's mood. So you can refer to the position of his arms or his legs, or his arms or his legs in relation to the other character. Okay, how to read the body language? Please go through these things in your own time. When someone is turned away from you, their entire torso is turned, it means they're not interested, for example. Someone who's got their arms crossed like this, not really open to a conversation, very much closed off. And this is not the gospel, but it is what has happened over the years in terms of how people communicate their body language. All right, then there's some examples there for you on showing helplessness, like, oh my goodness, what is it all about? Anger, the hands on the hips, facial expression, obviously the wide open eyes, no smile on the face. Okay, a very depressed look would be very slouched in their position. The entire aura seems to be downturned, right? Showing sadness or the depressed state. And then confusion, notice, would be higher, like, oh goodness, what is going on here, as opposed to helplessness, which is a little bit more towards the sides, right? Then if you're looking at onomatopoeia, look for that, because that is when something sounds as if it is happening, all right? Like boom or bang, you would already imagine what is going on. Okay, so the tone would come across when you're looking at the facial expression. Verbal and visual clues. I've explained this to you already, but in relation to the cartoon, remember, the visual clues is what we see. So here it's referring to the body language, the facial expression, the posture, and the drawing itself. Okay, that is the visual, what you see. The verbal clues are the words. That includes rhetorical questions, repetition of words, imperatives, minor sentences, dialogue between the two people, sound or devices, for example, that can be used as well. That is the verbal clues. Okay, so you need to firstly, also when looking at the cartoon, look at the actions, understand what's happening in the cartoon, how is the action being portrayed. The characters, there obviously could be 2 or 3 characters. What are the emotions they're going through? And this would be communicated through their facial expression. What actions are they portraying? That's going to be shown through the body language. What does the body language suggest about the relationship between the characters? Maybe one is leaning into the other, or maybe they are, again, one is turned away from the other, signaling a distance between the 2 characters. All right? The language being used, what words have been used, how have the punctuation marks been used, all right? Because that will affect meaning. Setting, where and when is this cartoon taking place, or in which part? What is a particular social context? Oops, sorry. um, stereotypes and symbols. Has the cartoon, for example, cartoonist made use of stereotypes? Did he try and, tackle my stereotype about a particular group? Has he done that? And has he used symbols to represent something? So then with regards to your recapping of your cartoons, remember, look at the picture and read for attention. Take note of the body language and the facial expressions. Look at the type of language being used. Okay? Are they informing? Are they maybe creating a scene of conflict? That kind of thing. All right? Look at the punctuation mark that is being used. In bold, certain punctuation marks might appear. Why are they bolded? Look at the setting and the background details of a particular cartoon. Identify the viewer's expectations. In other words, what do you expect to happen next in the next frame, for example? All right? And how is that overturned to create humor? And then while you're doing all of this, hopefully you establish the intention of the cartoonist. All right. So we look at the setting, we look for specific location or specific place. All right. We're looking at the purpose of the cartoon. Am I meant to laugh about this or take this concept seriously? Okay, or both of those things. Look at the facial features and be specific about that. Look at the body language. Look at how the characters are moving within the frames. The posture of the characters. Are they using gestures in terms of signals or signs or hand movements? Has he employed the use of the devices such as irony, puns, sarcasm? Has he used figures of speech also to elicit meanings? All right. And then obviously the allocation of the marks. For the 2 marks, you would get there uh, based on the language concepts. Right. Then we get to the last part of the paper, which is question 5. Now we've seen a huge increase in the average mark for question 5, and hopefully it's going to get better. So you need to go and understand by now that it's not definition based, but how those concepts are used in the text. All right? So usually the apostrophe or the semicolon or the ellipsis and the hyphen or the dash is linked to parenthesis. And that's something you should be knowing by now. Already, that's a quick win there for you. The spelling error is usually involving malapropism. All right? That the subject is doing something to the object. Okay? It's being, or the object is receiving a particular action. That kind of thing. If you're looking at reported and direct speech, okay, the tenses are changing, for example, from the present to the past tense. The 3 classic errors you gotta know, please, grade 12s, is the concord, the comma splice, and the misrelated participle. All right, so that is the 3 things that you can go over. You need to also know acronym versus abbreviation versus contractions that are being used, because the explanation here is important as opposed to just the identification of those things. Please also look at explaining expressions in full. For example, to ruffle major feathers means to upset someone. You need to be able to explain those things. The idioms and all of those things need to be understood as well. All right? Look at also antonyms versus homonyms versus synonyms versus homophone. All those things, okay? Do they fit in the context that is being described? Please also be aware of the mark allocation here. It determines how much of content is required of you. Again, use the past exam papers as a resource. Highlight those questions when you're working with them. And even now, when you get the paper tomorrow, highlight your concepts that you need to remember. Answer your questions in the preference that you are comfortable with. Practice your all exam papers under the strict exam condition, and make sure that you have managed your time thoroughly. So, for the textual editing, read the text and make sense of what you've read. Highlight and All right, grade 12s, we have gremlins and we have technical glitches, and this is part of the industrial revolution we find ourselves in. Hey, so apologies for that. I think I was basically busy on the recommendations for your textual editing. That's question 5. So when you get your text, your paper tomorrow, please, when we are looking at question 5, read the text and make sense of what you have read. Remember that you have to highlight or underline that deliberate errors with regards to spelling, punctuation, for example, the marks that have been used there, right? Please, you have a wealth of knowledge that you have learned thus far with language. You have to now take that knowledge and apply it to the text that is given to you. So your typical items that you need to be aware of is obviously your punctuation marks. Look at the use of the apostrophe, the semicolon, the ellipsis. Remember, the three dots, it's to make us think further about something. All right, the hyphen versus the dash, um, the parenthesis errors that's usually is looked for, spelling errors, dealing with the malapropism there, for example, your active versus your passive. Remember, there has to be the subject, the object, and the verb, the action being done to the object. That is important there. Your concord error, I mentioned to you already. Remember, your singular subject, singular verb. They must agree with each other. Same with the plural side of things. All right? Abbreviation, acronym. Remember there, grade 12s, it's not only identifying those things, but how they apply to the text that is being tested there, okay? And then the contractions I did mention to you, right? Your hot tip on your malapropism is to read that um, particular sentence out to yourself, not loudly, obviously, but read it to yourself. And then as you're reading it, you will sort of hear where the error is um, contained, right? So it is that mistaken use of a word in place of a similar sounding one. And it's usually therefore creating an amusing effect. All right? Your tautology, remember, it is saying the same thing twice over in different words. So your redundancy comes into play there as well. And when we say remove the redundancy or remove the tautology, you have to take that part out of the sentence. So it should not change the meaning of the sentence, all right? And then the error and the concord, remember there I said to you, let's make sure they are all agreeing with each other in terms of the subject and the verb. Okay, if it is not in agreement, it means it's a concord error that needs to be rectified. You need to go back and practice this, okay? Okay, then we've got the active voice and the examples there for you. I did say to you, it's performing when the subject of the sentence performs the verb's action. So then we're saying that that sentence is in the active voice. All right. Then in terms of the passive voice on the other side, we're saying that this is when the subject is acted upon by the verb. All right. So that is sorry, the subject is being acted upon by the object. So your verb is very important there. Okay. So look at that. Then in terms of the hyphen, please, it's recommended, this example, is it recommended you don't take down any load bearing walls when renovating. So there is that almost, this double barrel thing happening. The load bearing is where the hyphen comes into play here. So it's then saying we're taking two words and joining them together to form a compound word or a compound verb or whatever it is. So that's important for you to note the use of the hyphen. Okay, the comma, please, a comma is used to indicate a smaller break. So here we are saying that the right is usually associated with a soft pause. So that punctuation mark will separate words, clauses, or ideas within a sentence. So you need to note that. Be careful of comma splice errors as well, okay? Then we've got the apostrophe, which you must know very well by now, grade 12s, is we stick with two of the functions, which is usually the possession and the contraction. All right. So it is there to show those two aspects. And that's how you need to look at the sentence and find out, is that apostrophe used to show possession? In other words, it's owned by something, that particular object, or is it to show contraction? Okay. Now, over and above what we've done in this lesson, grade 12s, you've got to go back and make sure that you know specific ones that have featured over the years. So these are just the important ones I've mentioned to you. And you've also got to look at your phrases and clauses, for example. Remember, one of them stands alone and doesn't need anything to make sense, whereas the one needs additional information to make sense, all right? Your sentence structure. Is it a simple sentence versus a compound versus a complex sentence? These are things that you've learned over the years, and you need to obviously go back and make sure you have understood that if it is tested of you in question 5. You're looking again at your parts of speech. We had learned about parts of speeches long before we even got to grade 8. So they are still relevant because that is how we make sense of the world. If your language, the words that you are using in the language is not clear, or you don't understand why you're using those words, then you can sound quite foolish. So make sure, grade 12s, that you understand the words you are using. Don't just communicate for the sake of communicating. Communicate to create meaning with another person. All right, and that's important, if anything, that I can leave with you. All right, and then this is the list of the concepts that have been tested over the last 5 to 6 years in question 5, but it's not the only thing that can be tested. You need to look at this, understand these ones that have been mentioned over the last 5 to 6 years, and if you then do that, grade 12s, you are well on your way to get that at least 6 or 7 out of 10. There's only so much we can test on the textual editing part of this paper. All right. And so basically you need to go back and revise. Now, grade 12s, we've come to the end of this lesson. And all I can say to you is, I wish you all the best in the coming exam tomorrow. Please do not panic. The worst thing you can do at this point is to panic and try and push all the information into your brain. It's not going to happen. All right. So hopefully you have revised over the time frames that you had, and you've worked with the concepts for paper 1. It is 70 marks. It is a lot of marks that is available to you. Use your quick win strategies to make sure that you get those marks as quickly as possible without being too flustered. All right. And then your comprehension obviously needs you to be really engaged with the text. Find the meaning, find the purpose for why this writer has written this particular work, and link the introduction and the conclusion to the title. All right, that's important. And then throughout the other paragraphs, we try and find the topic sentence of each paragraph and the ideas that are added to that to make sense. All right, so it is quite intricate and it's very engaging. So you need to have, again, timed yourself very well with your practice sessions. If you haven't done that, remember to go back and look at the time allocation for each question and make sure you work in those particular time slots. If you spend too much of time on one question because you are getting confused or baffled, please do yourself a favor, leave it, go on to something that you understand, or can get the marks quickly, and then come back. So you need to, by now, as a grade 12 learner, understand these are my strengths. This is what I work best with at first. Let me tackle these things first and then come back to the more difficult parts of the paper. All right? But as I said to you, I want to wish you all the best for this coming session tomorrow morning. Take the time out to prepare. Also, don't burn the midnight oil tonight, because really you will get up very tired tomorrow morning and you will not be doing justice to this paper. Keep up with the current trends. keep up with the current social and economic and political issues that are happening so far, and then look at how or look at what you think about those things because they may feature in the exam paper tomorrow. So, all the best. Thank you for watching this lesson this afternoon. I wish you all the best. And until I catch you for another lesson in English home language, I want to say ciao for now, grade 12s, and take care of your health.